What did people do at night in the Middle Ages? You definitely didn't know that. When night fell in the Middle Ages, the world changed. The streets, engulfed in darkness, hid mysteries and secrets that could amaze even the most experienced historians. But what did people do after sunset? Nowadays, night is a time of rest. For many, it is a moment when you can immerse yourself in the world of dreams or entertainment. However, in the Middle Ages, night was a completely different time. Then people did not have the convenience of electric light, and every movement in the dark was filled with danger and mysticism. How often have you wondered what the dark night of a medieval city hides? What secrets, fears, and even forbidden pleasures were available to those who decided not to sleep? What did old taverns, mysterious monasteries, and dark alleys hide? Today, we will open the curtain on the nightlife of medieval people and show you what they really did when the sun disappeared behind the horizon. You will be surprised what habits and behavior were considered normal in those times, and what fears tormented people in the silence of the night. Get ready to find out what the night really looked like in the Middle Ages, what the dark streets hid, and what unexpected secrets it held for the brave. Immerse yourself in the atmosphere of ancient times. Let's start this exciting journey right now. Darkness in the Middle Ages was not just a physical phenomenon. It became a real enemy that had to be fought every evening. Imagine a city engulfed in the night darkness, in which there are no streetlights and electricity. The walls of houses and narrow alleys hide dangers, and complete darkness sometimes creates the impression that the world simply disappears. The night was so dark that in most cases it was possible to see only the closest objects, and everything else was swallowed up by the darkness, which seemed ready to swallow you too. For a medieval person, night is not only a time of rest, but also a time of fear. In the absence of electric lighting, the night streets became full of dangers. Bandits, robbers, and even wild animals could be near every step. Night attacks were the norm, and cities engulfed in darkness became a place where every move could lead to unpredictable consequences. People were afraid not only of predators, but also of other people, since it was easier to hide at night and attack the victim before it had time to do anything. Everyone faced this fear, even those who could afford a luxurious life. Aristocrats, who lived in their castles, could not feel safe either. For them, night was not only a time for sleeping, but also a period when they needed to be prepared for an attack. In many houses, even the most noble ones, there were swords and daggers by the beds, and sometimes even more powerful weapons. The fear of night attacks was so great that even high society did not forget to keep means of protection at hand. The principles of knightly honor and religious dogma could not prevent the eternal feeling of threat that followed every movement in the dark. The darkness became not only a physical barrier, but also a psychological one. It hid the most terrible fantasies and forced the imagination to work at full capacity. Medieval people often believed that not only robbers roamed the streets at night, but also demons, ghosts, and other supernatural creatures. The fear of the unknown forces of the night was so great that many decided to leave the house only in the most extreme cases. Even the most ordinary journeys at night were dangerous, and any noise behind the door could make the heart beat faster. Such a level of fear and tension can only be imagined in conditions of absolute darkness, when the whole world seems so close and at the same time so dangerous. Medieval people did not have the opportunity to hide in the cozy light of lamps or screens as we do today. Their world was literally dark and full of the unknown, and it was this darkness that became the real enemy that had to be fought every night. In those days, when the night was full of fear, strange sounds, and the darkness hid unknown dangers, ordinary night habits were far from what we know today. Medieval people did not sleep the whole night, as we are used to. Their sleep schedule was divided into 2 stages, and this was completely normal. The process of sleep, which we now perceive as unchanging and continuous, was something different for them. After sunset, they went to rest. But their night's rest was not a simple sleep with an unconscious shutdown. It was divided into 2 periods of time. The first sleep began immediately after dinner and lasted only 3 to 4 hours. This was the time when the body and mind, exhausted from the day's work and worries, plunged into rest. But here's what's surprising. When they woke up, the night did not bring complete silence and peace. People were in no hurry to plunge into the world of sleep again. Instead, they woke up a few hours later and remained awake for 2 or 3 hours. And here begins the real mystery of the medieval night world. This time was not empty and devoid of events. It was filled with activity, and often it was during these hours that people did things that in our time they would only do during the day. The time that we might call the second sleep became a period of activity and communication for people. They talked with family members, discussed the events of the day, read books or letters, prayed, performed rituals. In some houses, where there was more freedom and comfort, couples used this moment for intimacy and love games, because the night was a safe time to reconnect. But here's what's really shocking. In the second night, people could also do things that are quite strange to modern understanding. They sometimes visited their neighbors, went to visit. Medieval people, not having the isolation that is inherent in our time, often went on night visits to share news or just talk. It was a period when the boundaries between day and night were blurred. Unlike us, for whom night is exclusively a time of rest, medieval people perceived the night as a canvas on which they could live, even if it was dark and hidden from view. And what is surprising is that such night wakefulness was not perceived as strange. It was a normal part of their rhythm of life, a part that allowed not only to get enough sleep, but also to find the opportunity for communication, peace, and even fun in the same shadow of the night. And although today we consider night to be a time for rest and the day cycle for work and activity, for people of the Middle Ages, everything was different. They lived in a world where the division of time into sleep and wakefulness was not as clear as it is today. And in this night routine there were hidden not only practical needs, but also a special atmosphere, full of amazing, almost magical moments that we can no longer imagine. While the poor and peasants of the Middle Ages mostly struggled with dark streets and the dangers of the night, and their nightly rest was filled with anxiety and fear, the aristocracy and royal courts could afford a completely different way of life. For them, the night was not just an extension of the day, but also a time for entertainment, for sumptuous feasts and unimaginable holidays, where the boundaries between time and reality were erased. For nobles and kings, the night turned into a real arena for fun and merriment, and their castles became a place not only for politics, but also for endless entertainment. The night feasts that were held in royal palaces and aristocratic houses could last until dawn. When the rest of the people, restrained by fear of darkness and the limitations of life, were already hiding in their homes, the subjects of the upper classes enjoyed the luxury that the night could provide. They held banquets where they served the most exotic dishes, lit torches and candles, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Musicians played lutes and harps, dancers whirled to the sounds of cheerful melodies, and wine flowed like a river, delightfully mixing with the aromas of roast meat and sweet desserts. The feasts lasted for hours, sometimes until the morning. The elegance and sophistication of castles and halls were overflowing not only with wealth, but also with atmospheres full of thirst for life and pleasure. But here's what's surprising. Despite such long night celebrations, the morning did not mean the end of the party for the nobles. Unlike the peasants, who had to work from dawn, aristocrats and royalty often allowed themselves to sleep after a night of entertainment. For them, this was a natural rhythm of life. To sleep during the day and rest at night, and morning sleep was not considered a luxury, but rather a necessity for recovery after the pleasures of the night. But the night celebrations were not just a way to have fun. They served other purposes, both political and social. Parties, balls, and feasts were often used to make alliances, strengthen ties between families, and conclude important deals. Luxurious costumes, dancing, conversations, whispers about marriages and inheritances, all this became part of not only cultural, but also diplomatic life. Night meetings served to advance ambitions and strengthen status. On the other hand, for the peasants and the poor of medieval society, the night was a time to hide from dark forces, fearing robbers and wild animals. But for the rich, the night hours became a time when there was no fear, and the world was filled with music, singing, and light. Where ordinary people spent the night in prayer and bustle, aristocrats lived in a world where the night was full of grandeur and pleasure. While nobles and kings enjoyed their nightly feasts and entertainment, peasants, despite the fact that night was a time of rest, often had to work, performing important tasks that could not be postponed. The life of peasants in the Middle Ages was filled with hard work, and despite the darkness that covered the land, their life did not stop with the onset of night. Unlike the upper classes, who could afford the luxury of sleep, peasants were forced to continue working even during the dark hours of the day. As the night began, when the sun disappeared below the horizon, peasants often settled down to rest, but not all. At night, the earliest, most difficult tasks began, requiring their attention. One such task was milking the cows. Peasants rose in the middle of the night to ensure that milk was fresh and ready for use in the morning. Sometimes they went out in the light of the moon, so as not to miss the right moment when the cows were ready for milking. The moonlight, softly illuminating the fields, became the only friend for those who worked at night. In addition, it was not uncommon for peasants to go out at night to harvest, especially if it was necessary to remove ripe fruits before they spoiled. Moonlight was not just lighting, it was practically the only source that allowed peasants to work and not lose precious time. Agriculture required daily work, and the night became not a time of rest, but another opportunity to provide their home with everything necessary. Moonlit fields, the night sounds of animals, and the working hands of the peasants, all this was part of the integral reality of their nightlife. But work was not the only aspect of the peasants' nightlife. From time to time, when their strength allowed, the peasants also found a moment for rest, and perhaps for love. But here, too, darkness played its role. On dark nights, the peasants did not have luxurious chambers where they could hide from view, but they used the night as an opportunity for intimate meetings. Rural houses were often small, the rooms were cramped, and the only time people could be alone was at night. Spouses, unable to find privacy during the day, often resorted to nocturnal intimacy, which was not only a way to continue the family line, but also an important part of their emotional life. Thus, while the nobles rested, enjoying exquisite dishes and music, the peasants had neither the opportunity for entertainment nor rest. Their nights were full of hard work and household needs, and darkness for them was not only a shelter, but also a temporary refuge from the world where the work routine reigned. But, despite all the difficulties, the nightlife of the peasants was still associated with one value: survival and continuation of life in conditions of tireless labor. Night, despite its darkness and silence, was a time for medieval cities when the darkest corners became a scene for crime. In large cities where the population density was high and dark streets and alleys hid many dangers, night patrols were created to maintain order. City guards, armed with sticks and swords, were obliged to patrol the streets, ensuring at least minimal security at this time. However, despite their efforts, there were too many criminals, and the city streets were full of those who did not hesitate to take advantage of the dark night for their dirty deeds. Robbers, whose pockets were always full of knives and dark intentions, took to the streets in search of easy prey. It was easy to hide in the shadows of the night, and restless and tired citizens often became victims of quick and agile criminals. Gangs of thieves were well organized. Their actions were fast and cruel. They attacked lone travelers, broke into houses, stole everything they could carry. And despite the efforts of the guards who tried to stop the criminals, the situation remained tense. When the guards finally caught the criminal, his fate was often decided immediately. Unlike today, when even the most serious crimes go through lengthy trials, in the Middle Ages, the authorities and justice could be extremely cruel. If the guards caught a thief or criminal on the spot, the punishment could be immediate and cruel. No one knew how long it would take before the criminal ended up on the gallows. Without any trial, without protection, sometimes even without an examination of guilt, criminals were immediately hanged in the square or in the busiest places. This was a warning to everyone. Any violation of the order was followed by immediate punishment. The justice system was cruel, but in conditions of constant fear and violence, it seemed to be the only way to contain crime. The city at night was a truly dangerous place, where every step, especially in the dark alleys, could be the last. And although the guards kept order, their efforts were often helpless in the face of organized crime. It was important not only to uphold the law, but also to have the strength to maintain order in conditions of constant fear and threat. Thieves and robbers became the city's night ghosts, and the guards, as their night opponents, were forced to fight this evil with each new sunset, knowing that life on the streets would never be safe. Night in the Middle Ages was not only a time of physical darkness, but also a time when the spaces between worlds became more precarious and unstable. The darkness that covered the land brought with it not only fear of natural threats, but also great anxiety, which was inspired by the very idea that at night, forces that defy explanation come to Earth. People of that time believed that the dark hours between midnight and dawn were the time when demons, witches, and all evil spirits were most active. All this mystical threat was tightly woven into the fabric of everyday life, forcing people to avoid night travel and close the doors of their houses, locking them with all the locks. Belief in the supernatural was not just part of folklore, it was the basis of religious ideas, social life, and even everyday practices. Fear of the night, as such, became part of the culture of the Middle Ages. Witches and sorcerers were those who were feared most. They were considered capable of casting spells and doing evil in the darkest hours of the day. Belief in magic and witchcraft was not limited to folklore alone. It was a conscious belief that dictated people's behavior and even government policy. The time between midnight and dawn became associated with the greatest activity of witches and werewolves, who, according to medieval people, came out of their hiding places to perform dark rituals and bring misfortune upon the innocent. The appearance of werewolves, especially in those villages and towns where wolves were occasionally encountered, was a real nightmare for residents. People believed that it was during the hours of darkness that a person could turn into a wolf and attack herds, and sometimes even people. Talk of nocturnal animal transformations occupied an important place in local myths and legends, and fear of these creatures could force entire communities to lock their residents in their houses, seal windows and doors so as not to fall victim to evil spirits of the night. Even priests and religious leaders were wary of the dark hours of the night, warning people not to venture outside their homes during this dangerous time. Night was also a time when demons could come out onto the earth. Many believed that the spirits of the dead, restless and angry, roamed the streets, seeking revenge or wanting to eclipse the light of the living. The worst thing was that they could awaken hidden fears and weaknesses in people, causing illness, misfortune, and even death. People who did not understand the origin of illnesses and natural disasters often associated them with the intervention of dark forces. Purification rituals, night prayers, and spells were an integral part of everyday life, especially in villages, where mystical and religious practices still played an important role in society. It was for this reason that people often took refuge in their homes after dark. The fear of what might lurk in the shadows of the night was so great that even the rich and powerful, despite their palaces, did not feel safe. Ancient traditions and legends made them believe that nothing could protect them from the forces of the night unless they observed strict rituals and locked their doors. At this time, the darkness of the night became something unknown, all-consuming, and people learned from their own experience that the night did not truly belong to them, but to those forces that roamed beyond the borders of their world. As you can see, the night in the Middle Ages was full of mysteries, fears, and unusual traditions. It was not just a time for rest, as it is for us today. It was a time when the world seemed to hide unknown forces, and even the simplest nighttime activities could be filled with mysticism and danger. Fear of dark forces, work that never stopped for a minute, and amazing nighttime entertainment of the nobility. All this created a unique atmosphere in which people lived and survived. What surprised you the most? Maybe the night feasts of aristocrats, or the fact that peasants worked in the moonlight, not having the opportunity to enjoy proper rest? Or maybe mystical beliefs that made people afraid of the dark more than anything else? Write in the comments, share your thoughts. And if you are interested in learning even more amazing stories about the Middle Ages and other eras, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your comments and support help us create even more exciting and educational videos. Don't miss our next releases.